Live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this midweek edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight, the worst news South Africans would have wanted to hear. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is about to rip off your pocket as the country faces the biggest fuel price increases in history. We break it all down, the implications for the economy and for your pocket. Following yesterday's Makanda High Court ruling, forcing the Eastern Cape Education Department to provide textbooks for over 3,000 schools in that province, we sit down with the department's head to understand why they need a court to compel them to do what they are constitutionally mandated to do. Saftu General Secretary Zwelinzima Mavavi is on the ropes. His bosses are asking him to furnish them with reasons why he should not be suspended. Is South Africa's third largest trade union federation starting to unravel? If so, what would be the implications for affiliate unions? All that and more in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. Up until now, the Russia-Ukraine conflict may have been nothing more than news on television for many. But if predictions published today, based on the latest available information, are anything to go by, South Africans are going to feel the war in their pockets from next month. That's if, of course, that conflict continues. The Automobile Association today says that fuel prices will touch on 24 rands per litre for petrol and 23 rand 60 for diesel. And based on current data, 95 octane petrol is set to increase by 2 rand 15 cents per litre. 93 octane is expected to climb to 2 rand 7 cents per litre. Diesel by between 2 rand 94 per litre and 3 rand 8 cents per litre, and illuminating paraffin by 2 rands 51 cents per litre. Well, to help us make sense of all of this, let's welcome economist Sfiso Skenjana. Sfiso, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. All of us have every reason to worry about these predictions, if indeed they turn out as they or as the Energy Fund and AA are telling us they could.
Evening, Vuyo. I think certainly the predictions that we're expecting around the petrol price, I have many ripple effects for the South African economy. I think as a starting point, of course, when the cost of petrol goes up, that means, one, the cost of transporting goods increases in South Africa, as well as, of course, as the cost of commuting. We're seeing, of course, organizations trying to get people to come back into some combined remote work and work in the office type. And if some of the poorest households can spend up to between 15 and 30% of their incomes just on commuting costs, when we see record prices like this, it certainly then trickles down into those households. I think in a different context, of course, looking at particularly the increases coming out of paraffin there being the largest in terms of per rand increase per litre. We know that the largest consumers of paraffin in South Africa are the poorest households. And again, that's telling you the direct impact in terms of how these households are trying to get any sources of energy. I think the last one is also then looking at the cost of diesel itself and how that also will trickle into utility costs or energy costs in South Africa. We saw recently when Eskom had another malfunction in some of their plants. Then they started burning diesel. That usually comes through what they call the regulatory clearing account, which comes through the tariff applications that they put in for higher energy costs in South Africa. And so simply there's so many transmission mechanisms or channels through which higher oil prices transmission into the economy, and particularly in the way in which it impacts probably the most vulnerable of the economy.
And from what the AEA told us today, locally there is very little to cushion the blow for millions of South Africans who have struggled to cope with a fragile economy that is hurting their personal financial situation.
I mean, we've heard, of course, the National Treasury recently coming out saying that they are exploring or reviewing the formula to arrive at the petrol price, and they're expecting that could result in as much as 23% decrease in what becomes a petrol price as per that formula. And that's just one of probably the reprieve that consumers could have, but that's probably going to take some time. Outside of that, we have seen, of course, that the economy is still not pumping from all engines, and employment is not recovering at the pace at which. And we know that the South African economy, 59.6% of the economy expenditure comes from household expenditure. And so when households are pressed like this, it certainly means that also there's, I guess, a negative context in terms of what we expect from an economic growth for the country. And then that trickles down, of course, into the country's ability to create new jobs. And so it certainly doesn't paint a rosy picture for the medium-term prospects. And one of the studies that came out of the South African Reserve Bank, which was quite interesting, they were looking at how much does increase in petrol prices translate into inflationary outcomes in South Africa. And they tracked that from 1996 to about 2017, and they found that about 25% of the headline inflation is attributed by changes in petrol prices. And so when we see cost of living as well, petrol prices contribute such a high component in ultimately what becomes the average price level in the economy. And those are all the things that certainly become worrisome for the ordinary South African.
Of course, I mean, the AA does say that this, what, they spoke about today is still the mid-month outlook. And oil prices for the moment are, as they put it, seesawing significantly. So there may just be a bit more relief once the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy makes official adjustments. But be that as it may, what can households still do, to, cushion themselves or prepare for a worst-case scenario?
Yeah, I think it's hard to see the picture improving drastically compared to where it is at this point in time. Russia is the third largest supplier of oil in the world. And we've seen already in the way they've responded when the likes of Shell and BP have left, they've looked to nationalize those assets. And so the move to localizing their oil production probably means that there's going to be constraints from a supply point of view. And OPEC countries have also then not come to the picture in terms of saying that they will increase the amount of oil that goes into the system, which would push prices down. And so I think as much as it is a mid-month estimation, I don't expect a big variance in terms of what we can expect at the end of the month. In context, then, in terms of what can South Africans do at this point in time to I guess, cushion the blow, it is quite difficult given the fact that we are seeing, of course, the Reserve Bank coming down with a lot of pressure given the level of inflation in the economy. And that increases, of course, the cost of borrowing as well, which also increases the general price levels of things in the economy and makes it difficult as well for businesses to improve their investment choices. And so at this point in time, I think from a household point of view, it's really just trying to do as best as you can with what is in front of you, and trying to, of course, minimize in terms of travel and trying to do maybe bulk purchases, etc. But again, all of those there's some benefit will come, but I don't expect that it'll give too much of a reprieve for household participants.
Well, we can only hope for the best right now, hoping that, the situation can be arrested and that conflict can be stopped to avoid a worst-case scenario because, as you say, for most of us, there is really very little, if anything, that we can do if, of course, the situation gets worse. Sfisos Kenjana, an economist, giving us a sense here of what to expect in case or in the event things get worse than they are at the moment. And as per the predictions of the Automobile Association, we will have to pay. I mean, think about it. Fuel prices will touch on 24 rands per litre for petrol, 23 rands 60 for diesel. That's a scary prospect. Well, that's where we're going to leave that story. Up next, we speak to the head of the Provincial Department of Education in the Eastern Cape on the back of a court ruling yesterday compelling that department to deliver textbooks to school children. Over 300 schools in that province. Why did it have to get to that point? Did it have to take a court to order the department to give children textbooks? Welcome back. Well, it's become something of a ritual for community organizations and NGOs operating in the field of education in the Eastern Cape province. Almost always, they have to drag the education department to court just to get it to do what it's constitutionally mandated to do. It's been no different this year. 2 months into the school year, more than 3,000 schools are still without books. The reason the Kula Community Development Project last month took the department to court. Yesterday, the Makhanda High Court made a ruling, and to help us understand how and why things got to that point is the department's head of department, Dr. Naledi Mbuda. Good evening, Dr. Mbuda. Thanks very much for your time. First of all, are you going to comply with yesterday's court ruling?
We are going to comply with you. We will.
The question people are asking is, why did things get to this point? Why did it have to take a court to compel you to deliver the outstanding textbooks to these schools?
I must say that we are not compelled by, it is not an action compelled by court. The department was in the process of delivering textbooks. And I must correct that schools are not sitting without textbooks. The Eastern Cape Department of Education has a retrieval rate of 92%. So we only had to buy for 8%, which is called a top-up in government. The Eastern Cape Department of Education bought a consignment of textbooks in the 2017 financial year, a corrective order of almost 1 billion. So schools in the Eastern Cape are sitting with a retrieval rate of textbooks in a 5-year life cycle at 92%. So the 8% top-up is what we now have to give schools, because in the previous financial year, because of the reduction of almost 6 billion from the departmental budget, we were unable to order in time. This is why we had to write to the DBE, the National Department, and to Provincial Treasury for those funds. I must hasten to explain that the process that now we are compelled to do is a process that we already engaged in. We had started with the delivery of stationery. We are now at 100%. And with textbooks, because of our retrieval rate of 92% in the province, the 8% because we had to go to publishers. We asked the Provincial Treasury when funds became a problem in the Eastern Cape, because the inefficiency in the past was that instead of finding or getting more money to do the textbook ordering, we would do a process called a manual order, which in terms of the PFMA, if you overcommit the budget of the department when there are no funds available, you are doing what is called a financial misconduct as an accounting officer. So we're faced with a decision where you break one law to comply with another law. because the Constitution protects the rights of children to have textbooks. On the other hand, you have the PFMA saying you cannot buy those textbooks if you don't have the money for it. So it was that situation. But we did apply to the Provincial Treasury for the adjusted budget. We did get the funding in December on the 7th, the allocation letter. So between that time and ordering and making sure that we were ready for January, as you would know, that it was just before Christmas and companies were closed. So it was that top up that really was a problem for us, and the issue of stationery. Now, when the response from the Provincial Treasury came at the time, we had to go back as department to go and renegotiate prices. And if you have that in December and renegotiate prices, you have no other time in January just to do that. So this is what caused the delay. But it was not a compulsion by court because we were in the process. That's why we are going to comply, because processes were already in place. So
just to put it in a nutshell, money was taken away from you when money was taken away from everybody during COVID.
Yes.
So you are short of money. And because you had to do this, you had to go begging to Treasury to say, give us the money.
Exactly.
And it took time to do that.
Yes.
And by the time you got there, you got the money, you didn't get the money you wanted. You had to ask, you were asked to go and renegotiate the terms or whatever.
Exactly.
And that only happened in December, and you could only procure in the new year. And that's why you are here.
I must hasten to say, Vuyo, that at the time, the whole cost of both the stationery and the textbooks was about 520 million. Of course, you wouldn't have a provincial treasury having that much money. The Eastern Cape doesn't have that money. So we were asked to go back and cut, which we did. And finally, we only got to the 244 because that's what the province could afford. And by that time, schools were closed already. So this is what caused the delay. It didn't have to take us to court for that.
You know, of course, I mean, it becomes difficult for people to believe you or to buy your story, because you are a province that is notorious, you know, for not taking care of your books. I think for some point, for like 15 years in a row, you know, that department was guilty of what you call financial misconduct. And that's not the only problem. When it comes to infrastructural backlogs, you rank up there, you know, among the worst offenders. You have a toxic relationship with the unions. So all the bad things seem to be happening in that province. What are you going to do? I mean, you've been in the job for what, 6 months now, 7 months?
Yes.
So how are you going to deal with these problems?
One of the difficulties, Vuyo, is the fact that when you inherit a system as big as ours, we are 67,000 strong in terms of employees, and we have 1.6 million children in the department, and you can imagine the various stakeholders. The Eastern Cape is a very vibrant stakeholder community, which we engage with to discuss the issues and also find solutions together. But I must hasten to say that the breakdown of communication is what led to what we see now. Because on one side, I'm happy that you mentioned the issue of unions and parents. On one side, schools, particularly educators, and Saftu in particular, they want those funds to be deposited to schools. So the issue of the what we are calling a toxic relationship is worsened by the fact that when you have one role player on the other side wanting the money to be centralized at schools, and as government you've taken a decision to centralize that procurement, you are bound to have challenges. You are bound to collide in the process. But as a new accounting officer, I'm not so new anymore because I've been part of the system. Trying to change that system takes time. It's not an event, it's a process. One of the lessons I've learned, and I think this is the lesson that is important, that on one side, when you have the PFMA saying to you, you are not allowed to move out of the confines of the PFMA, to overcommit the department and also create, as it has happened, as you are saying in the past, overcommitted the department because you don't have a budget for it. You know, you create another problem on the side, because the other problem that you create is that you have schools that are waiting for you to be able to deliver on your mandate. Now, exacerbated by COVID-19, because we understand what the reduction was for. A government had to find money for vaccinations. People are dying of COVID-19. The jabs that people have are coming from that money. The 350, the post office, comes from that money. So you have the same community, stakeholder community, where you must constantly engage with them. You must constantly explain what the situation is, because we've reached a point whereby because we had the Constitution in 1996 and now we have COVID in 2021, with the reductions of the baseline in terms of the funding of government, you are never going to always be able to fund what you used to fund before. And so taking the system around and making sure that as much as we have a responsibility to provide, doing that within a framework that does not collapse the system is what I am faced with right now. I'm happy you asked about infrastructure. The infrastructure mode of delivery in the province, as you said, is not working for the Eastern Cape. The decision of government to use implementing agents is not working for the province. Hence, because you know the Eastern Cape had 4 accounting officers in 2021. We had Temba Kujana dying, we had 2 other gentlemen in the department, and then there was me. So within a year, you have 4 accounting officers who have to take decisions within that space of a time. The first time, therefore, that I'm going to have this financial year, the plan that we've put together to make sure that we do not fall into the same trap that we have fallen in, because we have to improve the efficiency of a system that doesn't work. Whether it is LTSM, whether it is infrastructure delivery, whether it is a scholar transport, which on the other side, the Department of Transport has gotten the same cut. We are sitting with children who can't be ferried because of the budget cut. All those issues come to impact on education. But with that, we cannot lose sight of the fact that we are a department of teaching and learning. And focusing on what is our core business also means that we have to take care of those things, but in an efficient way. Now, moving from that inefficiency is what we are struggling with right now, because people are used to a particular mode of doing things, which is one thing that we are grappling with. But because we have our stakeholder engagements, we will get there for you.
But I mean, you spoke about improving, your stakeholder relations, and that actually took me back to where this whole thing started, because when the Legal Resources Center was, or before they approached the courts on behalf of that community organization, they say that they wrote to the department to say, tell us how you're going to deal with this problem, number one. Number two, also tell us how you are going to avoid this situation or this happening again in 2023. And they didn't get satisfactory answers, they say.
The answer, of course, the answers that sometimes we give to communities are not what they are looking for. And I must be upfront about this. If you have a community that is looking for scholar transport now, explaining to them that I won't be able to ferry 123 children like we did last year, we can only ferry 103,000, you are bound to land up in court. If you explain to a stakeholder community that we couldn't buy the books because we had to wait for the money that we asked for, that's not an answer for them, because they want the books now. So always constantly engaging around that is a win or lose situation, because unfortunately, as much as you would explain the situation, they still want the books now. Even if the process that you are taking, because it's a government process, because if you go outside of the process, it's financial misconduct. For you, it's unauthorized expenditure. You get an audit qualification because you shorten the process. So while you have to deal with and contend with the need, doing that within a government process is what ultimately gets you in trouble. And we accept that this is what happens all the time.
Of course, I mean, you're about to, a new year has already started. There was an improvement in the matric results, which is why you were here the last time we hauled you from the other side of this building, celebrating the fact that there was a significant improvement. And you were the toast, of the moment at the time. But there's all these many and bigger issues that you're going to have. And I'm sure you don't want to leave this office at the end of your term having done nothing about all these problems that that province faces, or having actually exacerbated them. So what then are your priorities, or what's your plan going forward?
One of the realizations of the reality of the province is that as much as there are all these challenges, you still have a community of people who love education, who are dedicated to making it work. And I think that's something that we can leverage on, because as much as the problems and the challenges are there, you still have a responsive stakeholder community and parents and learners who are determined to make it, because education is what makes a difference in the Eastern Cape. Now, there are 3 priority areas that we are focused on. One is the issue of a change in the delivery mode for infrastructure in the province. The way it has been happening, with it solely depending on implementing agents and whether they perform or don't perform for various reasons, is something that the department is unable to work around. We've come up with a new plan for infrastructure delivery with the Department of Basic Education here nationally and also the Department of Public Works, so that we can take our focus away from that area, just over concentrating on those backlogs, to saying, how do we make sure that the department responsible for making sure infrastructure delivery is on top, is we have a partnership now with them. I want that so that we can take time away from focusing on the issues, as you are saying, to focusing on teaching and learning, because we are supposed to have to do what is required in terms of the law, is our key mandate, making sure that we improve on quality teaching and learning. And we've done that. We've moved. We are the second most improved province in the country. We've improved our bachelors, our distinctions, and making sure that not a single district in the Eastern Cape sits below 65%. That is the key focus of the department. And I intend, as an accounting officer, to get the community of the Eastern Cape to rally around making sure that education first, particularly the issue of making sure that this is why we've opened now, for the first time, the Eastern Cape has launched an online school, particularly because of realizing that you can't fix all the issues that are historical. But what you can do for those kids who can't be ferried to school, because the Department of Transport has a budget cut, is to make sure that you provide education wherever they are at. So that's the innovation. So innovation is important. Accepting that you can't fix everything, but those things that you want to focus on. So the issue of the online school is a big thing for me. We are running with it. We've piloted it at Jogabi with grade 8 and grade 9. It's going on well, and making sure that the issue of connectivity, because everything that we want to extend to our learners is something in a rural province that you can't always, because whether it's connectivity issues all the time.
That's where I was going to go, because for something like that, you depend a lot on connectivity. Internet penetration, we know, and especially in provinces like the Eastern Cape, is a big problem. But also, where are these children going to get the gadgets, and stuff to connect?
We've embarked on a project where we are giving the gadgets. We're making sure that the connection hubs. Children who are rural and who are poor deserve digital education. We can't say we can't give it to them because it's a rural province. Everybody has WhatsApp. Most people have access to WhatsApp or Facebook. And that minority that doesn't have, that's why we have those learning hubs, so that they can hub around that area and can access at that point. We are providing that so that we can extend access to education wherever children are at. Now, in areas where we are going to have problems, this is where the idea of hubbing, we've practically taken it up, because they must have access to that resource.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
agreeing to even come through and not do this interview via Zoom or something. Dr. Naledi Mbude, who is the head of the Provincial Department of Education in the Eastern Cape, following, of course, yesterday's Makanda High Court ruling, forcing the Eastern Cape Education Department to provide textbooks for over 3,000 schools in the province. You heard her saying it was only a top-up for the 8% of it. We're talking about 8% of the textbooks that were supposed to have been procured, and the big problem was the fact that they saw or experienced budget cuts, which then meant that they had to go begging to provincial treasury to get more money, which arrived late, which meant they couldn't do these things on time. Don't know what you think. You can write to us and tell us what you think of her explanation and everything else that we spoke about. Up next, Saftu General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi is on the ropes. His bosses are asking him to furnish them with reasons why he should not be suspended. What's going on at South Africa's third largest trade union federation? That's what we look at after this short ad break. Well, the South African Federation of Trade Unions has written to its General Secretary, Zwelinzima Vavi, and they are asking him to give them reasons why he should not be placed under a precautionary suspension while an investigation is taking place. And a bit of background to this from the rather terse letter that Saftu national office bearers have written to him. He was at a meeting at which the national office bearers took serious note that, and with great concern, the letter says, there are quite a number of transgressions on the part of Zwelinzima Mvavi that, the letter says, are tantamount to acts of misconduct and misbehavior and warrant investigations and possible disciplinary action. The investigation will, among others, be about the alleged violations of the Constitution, breach of administration and finance policy, and disrespecting or undermining constitutional structural decisions and resolutions. Well, Mr. Mvavi has, in the last hour or so, responded to that letter, saying in part, why are you sending me a letter of intention to suspend me when a so-called decision has already been taken in my presence to place me on suspension with immediate effect? Secondly, where do you derive the power to suspend a fellow national office bearer when the Saftu Constitution is categorical that only the National Executive Committee can suspend national office bearers? He goes on to say, I reject your unlawful and unconstitutional conduct, which is not only unheard of, but defies the logic of natural justice, in terms that Mr. Mvavi then goes on to quote clause this and clause that of the Saftu Constitution. He goes on to say in the please be therefore advised that national office bearers cannot usurp the powers of the National Executive Committee. Therefore, your so-called decision is unlawful. In the circumstances, I'm entitled in law to continue to report for duty as per normal, and I reserve my rights in terms of the Saftu Constitution and in law. The letter is about 3 pages long, but of course I'm not going to read it all. Well, what is going on at South Africa's third largest union federation? To help us make sense of it all, we have Dr. Dale McKinley, who's an independent researcher. We also have Patrick Dill, who is a specialist labor lawyer and commercial mediator. Dr. McKinley, your take. Okay, we seem to be having a problem with that line. Hopefully we'll get him back on the line. Patrick, your take. Please unmute. Please unmute. Patrick, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay,
yes.
okay, yeah, okay. Please go ahead. What is your take?
Well, I must say, just from reading these 2 letters, it does seem that the national office bearers have made a constitutional misstep here, because the ability to make these kinds of decisions, to take disciplinary action or to suspend, is clearly laid out in Saftu's constitution, which is the set of rules which determines how these things get done. And it is unmistakable that the Constitution does say that it's only the NEC, the National Executive Committee, which has the power to make these decisions and to suspend an office bearer pending the next meeting of the Central Committee. That's the hierarchy that should be operating, especially at the highest level, dealing with the General Secretary, which Mr. Mvavi is. So it certainly sounds at face value that the issuing of this letter of suspension is unprocedural and against the Constitution, and that Mr. Vavi has legitimate grounds to complain that it is unlawful and unconstitutional, and therefore he is justified to ignore it and continue to carry on his work until such time as a legitimate decision otherwise has been made in terms of the Constitution.
Dr. McKinley, I mean, assuming you agree with Patrick and on account of what Mr. Vavi, all the things that Mr. Vavi is saying in his letter, what do you think then could lie behind what we are seeing?
Well, I'm not a labor lawyer, so I'm not going to comment on the procedural aspects of what might or might not be procedural. But in terms of the larger political and organizational context, I think, as everybody knows, Zwelinzima Zimbabwe had some issues, obviously, with Saftu, much of the sexual harassment case that he was charged with there, and some of the issues there sort of bugged him for a long time. And there have been, rumblings within Saftu for quite some time, not just related to possibly personal conduct, but also some of the organizational difficulties, the issue of the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party, the issues, the tension between himself and Erwin Jim, President Nomsa, and so forth. So I don't think it's necessarily completely surprising that these issues have arisen. Obviously, none of us can comment on the exact content of these things or the veracity of them. But in terms of the state of Saftu, there have been many questions over the last 2 or 3 years around its organizational strength, leadership, what it's doing, its effectiveness. And so I think the tensions and some of the divisions are now coming to the surface. And this is what we're seeing in the person, in the nature of this letter and what the charges are.
Bugani Mngoma, I don't know if you agree with Dr. McKinley, especially when one considers the fact that, in the years that Saftu has been in existence, whether or not he's had, he has been effective on it, but he's been, the face and the voice of this federation. Do you think, him, getting out of the picture, whether it's temporary or permanent, will hurt Saftu in any way? Okay, we seem to have a problem with Bugani's line there. Can I throw that question at you, Patrick? Because for those of us who have had to deal with Saftu have only done that through Vavi and in forums, where they have had to be represented or we've had to, hear what they are about and their positions on all it. Not as surprising, for someone who was the General Secretary, but do you think they will be able to survive without him?
Well, he's a very influential figure, and he was central to the creation of Saftu when it broke away from COSATU all those years ago. He's a central figure in the union movement broadly, both before and currently in his role as Saftu. And he has also been instrumental in holding the organization together and to rally support right from the beginning of the concept of breaking away, and then holding it together with his considerable experience and his considerable ability to organize unions and within unions. And it's no small feat that he has played a major role, along with others as well, but he has played a central role in the creation of this organization, which, as I understand it, has around about 21 affiliates, over 800,000 members, which is a substantial body of people. And his influence will be significant, and it would be difficult for them to reconstitute without him in some way or another, even absolutely, or if he remains in some sort of damaged form. And there's no question that when a thing like this happens, accusations that are made, which seem rather broad and vague, I must say, are damaging. It has a damaging reputation effect on reputation. And I think it will damage Saftu and generally the constituent parts of Saftu. It will be damaging, yes.
Dr. McKinley, I mean, you are right. That, I mean, we don't know the facts, obviously. I mean, it's the Saftu NOB's letter, you know, versus Vavi's reply. So we don't know really what due process will yield. But I mean, having watched these kinds of things unfold, I think the writing is pretty much on the wall. But here's what I want to ask you: whether a young federation like Saftu, you know, and considering the fact that, I mean, how these unions, which then formed Saftu, came to be, you know, how they were either expelled, you know, from COSATU, or some decided to, or volunteered to leave to then form part of Saftu. Is this good, you know, for their image, as Patrick has just said, but also, could there not have been a better way of handling this fallout?
Well, let me answer the second part of your question, Vuyo, first, which is, yes, I think there probably could have been a better way. It's a bit clumsy. Whoever leaked the letter obviously had particular reasons to do so, because it certainly wasn't the office bearers who did that. So what it shows, though, is that the kinds of divisions within the union movement, personality conflicts, other kinds of things, have translated into Saftu from COSATU, and when one looks at the state of unions, generally speaking, they're fairly weak. So they could have, I think, handled this better. I think they could have handled it procedurally better, but politically better. But if there is a case to answer, well, then we'll find out about it. And I'm not convinced, having been involved myself in the union movement in various different ways, I'm not convinced that whether I'm not pronouncing on Bobby's guilt or innocence or anything about the charges, but I think that we do have a general problem within our political and organizational realm of what I call big man politics, that everything revolves around one individual and one personality. And we can see how this has happened not only within political parties, but within unions. And then when something happens, it does create a bit of damage. But in the long run, whether it's Vavi or anyone else for that matter,
Okay, we seem to have a problem with that line to Dr. McKinley there. Bongani, I'm hoping that your line is holding this time around. And I don't know if you've seen some of the things that people have been saying on social media, that all of this is coming on the back of allegations about, you know, how NUMSA's General Secretary Ivan Jim, you know, is the strong man and really, you know, ruling with an iron fist. And I remember a few weeks ago, before those allegations surfaced, the former General Secretary of NUMSA, in a very cryptic social media post, was talking about, you know, how union members should watch against, you know, the new practices that are creeping in, where you know, union leaders don't care about the unions themselves, but care pretty much about lining up their pockets, you know, and being bullies, and something to that effect. Do we divorce that from what we're seeing, or for what we're seeing today? Please unmute yourself. We can't hear you. Well, I don't know whether it's your line or you haven't been able to unmute yourself. Are you there, Bongani? Okay, no, we're battling. Dale, I've got to Okay, Patrick. Okay, apparently Dale has experienced load shedding there. Let me throw that question I was trying to throw to Bugani to you.
Yeah, look, everything happens in a context, and the context within which this event is unfolded is one within which unions have generally been weakening over the last 10 to 15 years. And they're particularly weakened and fragmented when the two federations came into existence, when Saftu was formed after COSATU separated from them. So that was a huge fracturing of the union power. And what that means is that the union collective power is considerably weakened by this. And this event is likely to trigger more weakening, because what lies at the base of all unions and all collective bargaining and a capacity to influence employers, groupings of employers in any setting, is unity. And unity is the one thing that holds them together. And if unity is fragile and starts leaking at the edges, and people start squabbling in amongst themselves, for whatever reason it is, I'm not going to venture into the politics of it. Doubtless, there's a lot of politics going on. But the net effect of it, Vuyo, is that the internal wrangling is going to weaken the unions further. Union members look on and they're saying, what's going on here? What about us? What are you doing for us? You're a service organization. If we can no longer depend on you to focus on our issues, instead of looking inwardly at your issues, then it's going to weaken further, and they might turn their backs on the unions.
In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, but only last week I had a conversation with former COSATU General Secretaries, Jay Naidu and Mbazima Shilowa, here on the program. And this was on the back of an acknowledgement being made by COSATU national office bearers that, their influence is waning. And considering the fact that, in fact, the very Saftu we're talking about now came into existence because people were either expelled or left COSATU. What does this all mean for the labor movement in South Africa? Whatever the reasons of this unraveling of Saftu that may well be beginning to happen now, or the waning of influence of COSATU, what does this mean for workers and the shop floor victories that they need?
Well, it effectively weakens the union movement, weakens their bargaining power and the capacity to push through the kinds of changes, wage increases, changes of working conditions, and so on. Because the people that they bargain with, the companies, the employer organizations, and especially government, where Saftu has got big membership, will be less influential. They will lose influence and the capacity to influence the direction of collective bargaining for improved wages and conditions of service. And as a consequence of that, they lose the upper ground, and they have lost considerable upper ground. And I'm concerned that this is going to weaken it further, and essentially what employers can do is take advantage of the weakened union position. But also, employers could use this as an opportunity to create different kinds of relationships with their workers, which they couldn't sometimes do with unions, to look at how they can be more included in the workplace instead of fighting over a diminishing cake, to work together to create a growing cake and how they share equitably in it. And so something different could emerge from the traditional manner of fighting over a given cake, and to rather concentrate on the bigger cake. And that's sometimes, maybe one of the reasons where there is this decay and the disintegration, because new ideas, new policies have not been dominating union movements. It's been old, basically ideological positions on this kind of social pact or that kind of social pact, instead of a relationship on how you actually build the economy and work together with employers independently but constructively.
Okay, that's why we're going to leave it. Thanks very much, Patrick Dale. Also, we'll thank, of course, Dale McKinley, whom we lost, as well as Bugani Mngoma, who couldn't really come through. And that's our show for this evening. We thank you for watching, but do join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.